good afternoon. First of all, I feel very sorry, but I have to correct KAM Thiam. I'm not Dr. Kam, because I don't have a doctorate yet. I'm looking for one. Sending up some signals. Actually, I'm very surprised to be invited to the conference, and even more surprised to be giving a paper on at a panel titled Theoretical Frames. Always like, do I have the status to speak about theoretical ways to study, the subcultures, popular cultures? But well, I mean, especially this paper I'm giving today is based on my master's research. But well, I'll give my 3 cents of thoughts, and I hope that it will be thought-provoking, or at least provoking to the audience. Okay, so let me begin. So of course, I mean, with the popularity of popular culture like manga and anime, one social phenomenon that has been associated with this popular culture has been otaku. And in many cases, otaku has been studied and discussed as subcultures that revolve around the consumption of manga and anime. For example, doujinshi artists, cosplayers, participants on comic markets have been objects of the study on otaku. And so, existing studies of otaku thus have resonance with studies of subculture because they seek to examine certain practices, certain modes of existence. And often than not, studies of otaku have focused on certain ways of consumption, such as consumption patterns in relation to communication styles or a lack of communication, productive consumption, or consumption in relation to a number of historical developments in Japan. However, my stance, I do not look at otaku as subcultures. In fact, I don't identify certain subcultures such as cosplayers or doujinshi artists as otaku. Instead, I look at otaku as a label. And in so doing, I hope to redirect our critical attention to one aspect of consumption that we might tend to overlook. That is the rules people have concerning consumption. So why did I say we can study rules of consumption through the study of otaku? So let's, for example, look at Kojien's definition of otaku. People who are interested in a particular genre or object are extraordinarily knowledgeable about it, but are lacking, keyword here, social common sense. Yoshi. That was the Japanese phrase. So here, otaku, what defines otaku here is one who lacks common sense. So while this definition seems apparent to some people, I think we should ask, what is this social common sense? What is this common sense that otaku lack? I mean, the people that identify as otaku lack. And as I will suggest later, right, I mean, this common sense is very much related to the sense of how people should consume, the rules of consumption in contemporary capitalist Japan. And I propose that we should not take this, of course, we should not take this common sense as granted, but instead interrogate it critically. As Clifford Geertz observes, while common sense is often presented as natural, it is culturally and socially situated. So they are always specific to particular social contexts. And hence studying this common sense is also important in our examination of Japan's contemporary society. To interrogate this common sense, then I choose to look at otaku as a label. So how is looking at otaku as a label different from looking at otaku as a subculture? So in looking at otaku as a subculture, there's a tendency to identify certain subcultures as otaku and then focus on their members' motivations and practices, such as their communication, their creations. So of course, as I mentioned earlier, notable examples include participants of comic markets, whether the Ippan Sankasha or Saku Sankasha, and more generally, avid fans of manga and anime. In this approach, it's also quite common to trace the historical developments of particular subcultures, like how anime subculture is derived from science fiction subcultures. And representing this graphically, once once this A is identified as otaku, then the focus of analysis will be on A, just on A. To look at otaku as a label, I borrow a perspective derived from Howard Becker's study of deviance. So Howard Becker challenges conventional studies of deviance by pointing out there are no acts for people who are inherently deviant. Instead, society creates rules, the infraction of which constitutes deviance. So deviance is inseparable from certain social rules, in particular social and historical contexts. So applying Becker's insights on the otaku phenomenon, we can say that otaku are people labeled as such. And labeling involves a value judgment and invocations of certain rules or values. And these rules and values are reflective of a particular social milieu. In my case, I mean in the case of otaku, that of contemporary Japan. And so in adopting the labeling perspective, my interest lies in the rules and values articulated as common sense and their social context that make possible the labeling of person as otaku. So in my empirical research, I interviewed 51 Japanese university students, asking them who they identify as otaku and their reasons for doing so and their reasons for not doing so. I will now outline some of the rules that I observed the students invoking and then discuss how these rules can be linked to the context of contemporary Japan. So for example, I have a student who told me that yaoi readers are not otaku because they are women. For him, otaku can never be women. So his view, I mean, echoes the general difficulty my informants had for envisaging female otaku. So most of them might say, oh, technically I think they should be a female otaku, but I just couldn't picture them in my case. So, I mean, this seems to be called a kind of critique of otaku studies that focus has been placed on male otaku and that the existence and vibrant culture of female otaku is being ignored. But of course, I mean, before we go on and dismiss this, it's like my informant that he has a misperception. I would say that from a labeling perspective, he was judging people by invoking a rule that states that consumption is gendered. And for the convenience sake, I call this rule the masculinity rule. So the invocation of this rule is evident when students reserve this label of otaku for men who consume objects that they think are inappropriate for men. For men who consume that what men usually or naturally would not consume. So for example, a student would say that, oh, men who own figurines of those pretty female characters, they are otaku. But if they own figurines of Gundam, they are not otaku. And then I mean, it's like this, I mean, I'm sorry to bring this example, but this is more of pop ideas. But for example, while these students label as otaku those men who engage in unnatural or socially unacceptable forms of consumption, these forms of consumption, they usually say is perfectly natural for women, and so the example of pop idols, right? So, for example, some of them stated that it's unnatural that men pursue pop idols. It's like Morning Musume. I'm sorry, Morning Musume was the hit during the time of my view of not AKB48, but and hence those who follow the Morning Musume, they are otaku, right? But it's like if the women they chase after their Baekhyun, Young-sama, or Jani, they're fine, they're not otaku. I mean, it's like, and hence, it's like they feel that this indulgence in pop idols is natural for women, and hence female fans of pop idols are never otaku. So, because these students invoke a rule concerning men's consumption, they do not include women as otaku. From this masculinity rule, we can say that the objects of consumption, especially in pop culture, popular culture, are gendered, and gender in contemporary Japan is determined in part by consumption, even while certain boundaries have been supposedly blurring due to a new stage of capitalism. And this trespassing of gender boundaries is especially problematic for men when supposedly superior men emulates the supposedly inferior female culture. There's more potential to destabilize and undermine the superiority of the male gender. Okay, another rule that I have observed is what I call a majority rule. And here people are labeled as otaku for consuming what is unpopular, unknown. So in contrast, people consume what is popular or well-known are never considered otaku. So a number of students states that, if you there's something about play, you can distinguish between players of games and say, it's like who are the otaku and who are not the otaku. If they play games like best-selling games, Final Fantasy, they are not otaku. But if they play things like romance simulation games, those are not very well known, not popular, or those players are otaku. And so this is the logic that I call majority rule. And at this point in time, I will just make a preliminary match with what John Samuel has observed, which is the tyranny of fashions, in which he thinks that in contemporary Japan, consumption is marked by much conformity. Some students I interviewed point out that they will reserve the label for those people who do not communicate well, who lack sociability. So in contrast, those who display the ability to communicate with others are not otaku. So for example, one student saying that doujinshi artists are not otaku because they're creating works and showing off their works to others, so they're communicating, they're fine. And this is the rule that I call communication rule, where consumption has to foster communication, where there must be communication in and through play. This observation recalls the infamous association of otaku with communication problems. But rather than asking why otaku, which often refers to subcultures and anime fans, why they are not communicating well, I would like to ask, why is there an anxiety over communication? A similar concern actually for communication can be found in Sir Elliot Red's discussion of the discourse on social play when he was discussing Tokyo Disneyland and how the international play associations was articulating a particular discourse on how play should be. And in this form of discourse, the highest form of play, called asobi, is one that promotes interpersonal communications and other forms of social competence. So how can we contextualize this communication rule? Why is there an imperative to communicate in contemporary Japan? I think this concern for communication could perhaps well be understood in relation to the desire of the Japanese state, whereas discussed by A.L. Ben-Ari or Ken Nelson, the desire to develop citizens who can function in collective situations. But I think the emphasis on communication is even more pertinent in contemporary Japan, where immaterial labor has become increasingly valued. Communication skill is actually one of the most important forms of immaterial labor, since the production of capital depends on the coordination and cooperation of individuals. Communication is also a valuable act in consumption as it helps to increase the market base, expand the market base for a product. This is actually, for example, evident in the so-called market researchers' positive evaluation of otaku after 2005. Actually, if we look closely at those discourses articulated by the marketers, what they value is the ability to communicate information to other consumers and potentially expand the market. And finally, there's this thing called what I call reality rule. This is a rule that I derive from the observation that some students identify as otaku, people who indulge in their hobbies and imagination and not return to reality, which usually refers to work, studies, a sense of responsibility. And hence, this rule is similar to what Jock Young, writing on modern industrial societies in Britain and America, calls the ethos of productivity, which states that play is only justified if it can lead to more work, and all play which deviates from this ethos should be condemned. This ethos of productivity could also be observed in contemporary Japan. The encouragement of play that induces people to labor further, I think, has been discussed since the works of analysis. I think the invocation of the reality rule in otaku labeling probably represents the other side of this equation for the ethos of productivity in Japan. When people are engaging in consumption that seems to lead them away from production, they are condemned. Reality rule then has its roots in modern capitalist society where production is reality. Yet reality rule has also another dimension in Japan, experiencing the advanced stage of capitalism. In a society where immaterial production is becoming increasingly important, reality also reveals an anxiety of consumption and the capacities involved, such as imagination. This is because consumption is vital to the production of capital, yet it could also be capital by leading people away from production. I would like to draw some concluding remarks on the rules that I examined through otaku labeling. Firstly, we can see that these rules are